The Daily Derech. We are walking the path of holiness.
Hello, everybody. This is Rabbi Marcus Rubenstein. Welcome to the Daily Derech, a special project of exploring Judaism, the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, and the Rabbinical Assembly. Today is the fifth day after Shabbat Kodesh, the 1st of Nisan, 5786, corresponding in the secular calendar to Thursday, March 19th, 2026. We will read Parashat Vayikra this coming Shabbat, and we are 13 days from Pesach. Let's begin. All right, we'll begin with Me'am Loez on the Parashat Vayikra, and guess what we're talking about? We're still talking about Vayikra, the first word. We still haven't gotten past that first word yet, and it's so important, so let's continue to talk about it. God calling on Moses to come to the tent of meeting. That's how our parsha begins this week. And we spoke yesterday about this weird thing, is that the aleph at the end of the word Vayikra is small in the Masoretic tradition and is printed in Sifrei Torah. It always is like half the size of a normal aleph. And we spoke a little bit about a midrash yesterday about Moses' humility, which is really important. But there's actually other reasons also why this aleph may be small. And it actually connects to something really important about the book of Parashat Vayikra, and I think it's a book of Vayikra, and also I think what a lot of people are confused about and kind of stunned about when they first learn. So when children traditionally begin to learn the Torah, according to our tradition, they should start with the book of Vayikra. They should start with the book of Leviticus. Now, this is very strange, because if you know anything about the book of Leviticus, which I do, it involves a lot of sacrifices, a lot of very, very punctilious ritual, and a lot of things that, honestly, it's very sometimes hard for modern Jews to connect to. If I was thinking of a place to start children in Torah, I would probably say the book of Genesis. Start with stories. I mean, kids read stories all the time. They love stories. It's easier to follow for them, less boring per se, as they might think. And so maybe we should start with the book of Genesis. But the sages interestingly say that children should start with the book of Leviticus. It stunned people for a very long time. And according to our rabbis, it's actually hinted at in the idea that the aleph is small, right? Why is the aleph small? Because that's where the small children start. They start with that exact word, and it's where sort of the Torah coming to meet the children where they're at. But if that's what this is about, and it's about the Torah coming to meet children where they're at in their smallness, then really, we're meeting children where they're at by teaching them about sacrifices and worshiping God by killing animals? I mean, that is a strange choice, and I think it requires some unpacking to understand why. Well, the understanding is that children are very, very pure, and I know this sounds kind of weird in our day and age, but it seems that the rabbis really thought the importance of children studying Torah is this incredible thing, not just for passing on to the next generation, but because children have this unique spiritual status in that they are young, and so therefore, according to our sages, they haven't done as many transgressions as adults have. Number one, because they're below the age of majority, so they're not completely responsible for their actions, their parents are, but also because they just have less life, and they look at things a little bit more simply than maybe adults do. And I think for this reason, it was felt that studying the sacrifices is this beautiful thing, because sacrifices should be offered in this state of purity, and who's more pure than children? And I think that's in some ways beautiful, but doesn't really answer our question. Why? Is that really the best place to pedagogically to start children with Torah? What's going on there? I think probably if I was to take a whack at like what's going on here, it's the idea that one thing I've realized with working with children is oftentimes when you get into like real deep ethical debate and critical thinking, which is the stuff we really love about Judaism, I think as adults, is actually like really hard for kids. They have a lot of trouble thinking in terms of gray, and also a lot of trouble thinking about ethics and some of the bigger questions that we think. And actually, sometimes, there's this big temptation to teach this to children because obviously it's for most people, I think the biggest impactful part about the Torah is the depth and the gray and the answering the big questions. But children aren't really quite ready for this. And actually, oftentimes what's most helpful for kids is starting with something that's relatively black and white, that's relatively formulaic, something that they can memorize or something that they can own. And this is a case where that's the case, right? The sacrifices are they're detailed in terms of their instructions, but it's not an opinion question. What the sacrifices are sort of what the sacrifices are. And instead of learning them, actually, it might be actually really good for children because the sacrifices actually really do need to be learned. They're really a big part of our Torah. And I think in their sort of non-questioning nature in terms of, just learning something and not needing to answer the big questions yet, it enables the children to actually be empowered by this, something that they can actually learn and understand instead of a story that might hint at hundreds and thousands of different meanings, the biggest stories in our tradition. So I actually think there's a lot of wisdom in this. And I think also for adults as well, we should all be studying the sacrifices. The sacrifices were the most ancient way, according to the Torah, in which we came close to God. Now, I'm not saying that we should necessarily do the sacrifices right now. Maybe the third temple was created. But I think the sacrifices certainly have something to teach us about how we approach God, how we draw close to God, and how we draw, a lot about our lived Judaism and the lived Judaism of our ancestors. And it's a very important tradition, actually, that by studying the sacrifices, it's almost like we are actually doing the sacrifices themselves. That's really, really important. It helps maintain our connection to the temple, which, of course, ideally would be here, but is destroyed. And so we're in a less than ideal position. But I think by starting with the sacrifice, we're actually starting with the ideal of Jews who have a temple, who have power, who have sovereignty, who live in an ideal state. I think teaching that to children before teaching them sort of the bediavad or after the fact state we live in terms of modern Judaism, I think is really, really important and really beautiful for children. So let's take a whack at it. And if you're an adult, hey, learn those sacrifices too. Dig in. All right, we'll finish today with Menorat HaMaor. We're still in the second chapter on Pesach, on the section on Pesach. And we're going to learn this incredible... Oh, I love this one. Are you ready for a good one today? I'm ready for a good one. This is going to be great. So we talked yesterday about this idea, that passage where Pharaoh was saying to some random advisors, he was saying, let's get wise here. Let's figure out how to beat these people before they beat us, right? And he seems to be talking to these anonymous advisors. Well, let's just be honest. The rabbis are pretty uncomfortable with anonymous people, and they like to fill in the details. And this is a great example of sort of what I would like to call rabbinic fan fiction, right? A moment where the rabbis sort of fill in details and make the story, I believe, so much deeper and so much more impactful. And this is a wonderful case. This is an agadata from the Talmud, a story from the Talmud, or a legendary homiletical material from the Talmud, from Sota 11a, Tractate Sota. According to Rabbi Chia Bar Abba, said in the name of Rabbi Simai, 3 were involved in the council, Pharaoh's plan against Israel. So what are they talking about? Right? There were 3 advisors who were standing by when Pharaoh said, "Let's get smart and do something about these troublesome Hebrews." And who are those anonymous people? According to our oral tradition, according to our rabbis, according to Rabbi Chia, at least Bar Abba, so there were 3. Number 1, Bilam. Number 2. So Bilam, remember, we talked about this in previous classes, but if you weren't listening then, or maybe you don't know the story, Bilam is this warlock that is eventually going to be hired by the king of Balak in the book of Numbers to curse the Jewish people, and sort of is a enemy of the Jewish people. And eventually he's killed in the book of Numbers. Then there's Job, or Eov in Hebrew. Job is mostly known from a biblical book of the Bible, in the Ketuvim section, or in the writing section of the Tanakh. That is a famous story about a man who all these awful things seem to happen to him for no reason, right? And he seems to be a righteous person, but all these terrible things happen to him. And the whole book is him struggling with God and struggling with theology of why bad things happen to good people. Very important book, very hard book of the Tanakh. Very surprising book that it's even in the Tanakh in the first place. And I think it represents really the resilience of Jewish theology and Jewish tradition. It's really beautiful. You should read it. But yes, there's Job. And then finally, there's Jethro, who will be the father-in-law of Moses within the book of Exodus. Right? Jethro is the father of Tzipporah. Tzipporah eventually becomes the wife of Moses and is the place where Moses runs to after running away from being in the castle, being in Pharaoh's castle. And what's interesting is the rabbis actually see this and have an oral tradition that these 3 advisors were actually present with Pharaoh, which brings them back way earlier in the story than we would have thought. So, but each of these 3 advisors did something different in response to Pharaoh saying what he said, that we should do something about these Jews. Bilam gave the advice who actually felt that he should give advice. And so he gave advice. We actually don't know the advice he really gave. But according to the punishment for him giving advice to Pharaoh after that moment was the fact that he was killed, which is interesting. We think that he's killed because he tempted the Jewish people through idolatry and through scheming and everything like that. If you just read the book of Numbers, that seems the reason why he is sort of killed by God and killed by the Jewish people. But according to this rabbinic tradition, it's specifically because he actually answered Pharaoh and gave advice on how possibly to do this. But we don't even have advice of whether Bilam said, don't do this or how to do this. We just know that he gave advice in the first place. And we know that the punishment for that was that he was killed, the death penalty. Pretty steep, right? Very interesting way to reply. Wow. This is a beautiful situation of how do you reply to someone who wants to do evil, who wants to do something bad to somebody else? How do you respond when you see someone in power who wants to do something injustice? And what do you do about it as sort of a bystander or even an advisor in that tradition who's under the person of authority? So obviously Bilam did the wrong thing by giving advice. Fine. Why might that be? Well, sometimes when something's so bad and someone's saying something so bad, you have to make clear that you don't even want to be a part of it in any way, shape, or form. And even by giving any advice whatsoever seems to communicate that this is a plausible idea or somehow this might be a good idea, but you might have to have a different strategy or what have you. And by doing this, Bilam, we don't even need to know the advice Bilam gave. All we need to know is that he gave advice in the first place and even considered what Pharaoh is saying seriously. And for that reason, he was killed. Interesting. Okay. Very much tells us how we should behave amongst people who have power and want to do something bad to somebody else. Then we have Job. Job remains silent. Job didn't say anything. And because of this, he was punished with suffering. And we know that. And so very interestingly, they do not see Job as a righteous, completely righteous person. They see someone as he was a bystander, a person who might have had some power, but didn't use it, was sort of too shy or too scared to use his power at that time. And he just remains silent. He stood there. And so the Pharaoh could have interpreted, well, he agrees with me, and that's why he's still standing there. And so for that reason, he was still punished. And maybe he should have spoke up at that point, or maybe he should have done something. But by staying silent, actually, we learned that that's why the rabbis believed that Job experience all these punishments as narrated in the book of Job. Now, this is very interesting because it seems to also be saying that the rabbis are pretty uncomfortable that Eov was being punished for even though he was righteous. The rabbis now have a retcon saying that Eov actually wasn't so righteous. Maybe he wasn't horrible, but he was sort of not as strong as he needed to be. And finally, we have Jethro, who you would expect when it comes to Jethro, okay, Jethro's the good guy, right? We know Jethro is going to be a good guy. You expect him to say, hell no. Right? No, Pharaoh, don't kill the Jews. Don't do that. That's actually not what the Torah says. It says that Jethro actually ran away at that point, similar to what Moshe would eventually do as well. But he ran away. He said, I can't be a part of this. If you're even considering this and you're thinking this way, this is not an administration I want to be a part of. Actually, this is not even a place where I want to live. And Jethro gets up and leaves. And that's an incredible, heroic act that Jethro does. And I think many people can say, well, maybe Jethro should have done something more. Maybe Jethro should have fought or argued back. But I would say to you, like, maybe that wasn't in the ability of Jethro. That was actually going to make the situation worse. It would make Pharaoh angry. And the best thing to do is to register to Pharaoh that he doesn't agree and then put himself at a position of personal safety and get out of there and just walk away. And that's what Jethro did. And it's for that reason, according to our Talmud, that he actually sat in the Sanhedrin and he sat and judged difficult cases with the Sanhedrin because he made such a righteous action. I think what this communicates us and tells us the central message is that sometimes speaking up actually isn't the right thing and the right way to stand up against evil. Sometimes actually speaking up actually makes things worse. And the best thing to sometimes do is just to get out of there, just to leave, just to get yourself out of there. And I think that's such an important instruction for us today. And very importantly, also to not just stay silent, but show your discomfort by leaving, by getting out of there, which is so important. All right, let's continue with the Mishnah Torah on Chametz, uMatzah, the laws of Passover for the Mishnah Torah. And we'll start the 4th chapter today. Ooh, new chapter. Very exciting. And we'll go through the first and second halachot, the first and second laws of this chapter. What are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to talk specifically about what does it mean that we can't actually have chametz and we can't actually own it, have it. What does this mean? And sort of what are the regulations and laws of this? And this is where I think it's so beautiful the way the Torah has so many different verses that seem to be saying the same thing again and how the rabbis use them in such an ingenious way to actually to flesh out the practical and lived laws of the Jewish tradition. This is really where the genius of the rabbis come in, and I would say in a deeper sense, the divinity and the beauty of the Torah. So in Exodus 13:7, it says, "No chametz shall be seen for you," right? Which could easily be interpreted as, okay, I can't see chametz. This is like actually a big problem because like we live in a society like where there's chametz everywhere. What you can't go out in the street? You can't look at the bagel store? You can't go buy a pizza shop on Pesach. Imagine if that was what we had to do. And of course, that's not the law, right? It would make it so that we couldn't even live in America during Passover. We'd all have to move to some like place that had to agree that it would have no bread anymore, right? That would be pretty difficult to do. And so that, thank God, is not the way that this is understood. But I think even in a deeper sense for us, you might say to yourself, if this was the only law, no chametz shall be seen for you, you might say, okay, well, I'll just bury my chametz or give it or entrust it to somebody else who's not Jewish during this time, and I won't transgress the commandments as long as I don't see the chametz. That's what really matters. And that's why the Torah goes on and says in Exodus 12:19, a chapter before that says, chametz should not be found in your homes. It shouldn't be found there. So, and according to the Rambam, that implies that even if the chametz is buried or is not seen in your house, then still you would be in violation of Exodus 12:19 that says it can't actually be found in your homes, which is really important. Now, you could easily then say, according to the Rambam, okay, so let's just have Exodus 12:19 that says the leaven should not be found in your homes, and let's get rid of the extraness of Exodus 13:7 that says no chametz shall be seen for you. What does that mean? Why does it have that extra verse there? Well, of course, we know from the first thing that leaven should not be found in your homes, but you might then say, okay, well, I'll just take the chametz out of my home, right? And I still own it, but I'll let someone else have it for a little bit, or I'll put it in a warehouse somewhere, right? Even though it's not in my home. And that's the reason why this other verse, Exodus 13:7 says, no chametz shall be seen for you in all your territories. So no matter where it is, if you still own the chametz, it's still a problem and would still be a violation of that Torah mitzvah there. So very, very important. And this is, again, why we get rid of our chametz, and then eventually why we sell our chametz. It cannot belong to us. But I think there's like an important caveat at the end of this passage. So what it seems to say, and this is a nice, I think, leniency that's given here, is that also what these verses mean is even if the chametz is in your territory, or even if it's in your house, it's still considered acceptable if the chametz doesn't actually belong to you. So if the chametz belongs to a non-Jew, even if it's in your house, it's okay. That's actually considered acceptable because the rules of this are actually it's your chametz, right? Not any chametz, but your chametz. Chametz belong to you. So if chametz doesn't belong to you, even if it's in your house or near you, that is considered acceptable. Now, there is a tradition, there's an idea in the rabbis that we should still build a fence or some kind of divider between ourselves and the chametz so we don't see it all the time. Not because it's wrong to see it, a chametz that's not yours, just because you might mistakenly then say, okay, it's in my range, I'm hungry, I'll just eat this. So we have a tradition and this is where it comes from, that when you sell your chametz, you don't necessarily have to get it out of your house. That's ideal, really. But most people, including our family, we'll put all of our chametz in our storage room in our house, and then we'll sell, we'll get rid of what we can get rid of. But let's say it's expensive chametz, or it's like scotch, whiskey, something like that we want to keep around, and then we don't want to just waste all this food, which is, I think, the truth of many families these days and many people. And then what we do is sell our chametz to a non-Jew and close it and tape the door and make sure that it's locked away so we can't have it, but it's still in our house. And in doing so, we are fully in compliance with the Torah and the halacha as the rabbis see fit. So I think this really makes it somewhat easier for Jews to observe Shabbat, and this is sort of where the selling chametz works so well. And that's why it's so important that even if you get rid of most of your chametz, if you have any chametz in your house, then you should still sell your chametz, even if you put it away. And even if you don't think you have any chametz in your house, still good to sell whatever chametz is there, because maybe you didn't realize or maybe you didn't see that it was there. So all these things are really important. And I think you see really wonderfully here how the rabbis created and read the Torah so that it's actually a livable tradition, so that we can actually live with our commandments and not be so oppressive that it would be impossible to actually live in society with and fulfill the commandments at the same time. Well, that's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Daily Derech. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to email me anytime at rmr@templeofaaron.org. Thank you so much for listening. There are so many people to thank, and you can look in the show notes for that. And also, if you want to know and see any of these texts in the original, we actually have that too. You can actually find that in our episode description. So look in each of the episode descriptions, and you'll find that information right there. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.